One APIA Nevada is a grassroots nonprofit organization that advocates for policies empowering everyday Asian Pacific Islander Nevadans. Nevada is home to a growing APIA community, accounting for 1 in 10 voters. We are One APIA Nevada. Tonight's episode of Out in Front is brought to you by our season sponsors, Nevada State Education Association, One APIA Nevada, Silver State Voices, and Stefan and Marta Schmidt.
All right, everyone, welcome back to OIF. This is Annette Magnus, the Executive Director of Battleborn Progress, and I'm so excited to be here with you tonight, back in the building and back at the NVLeg with all of the updates for the end of session. We are coming to the end of session rapidly, and there is a ton going on in the building, and so we are excited to be with you tonight. So tonight I'm joined by amazing guests. We're going to have lots of fun. We have Senator Dallas Harris. We have Steve Sebelius from the RJ, one of my longtime friends. We have Assemblywoman Cecilia Gonzalez, and hopefully we'll have Assemblyman Yui Wynn. Assemblyman Wynn is stuck in committee right now. We knew that might happen. He's stuck in revenue because there is a deadline tomorrow. So there is so much going on in the building. You can kind of hear it around us. There's still people all around. So we're going to get right to it. So I want to bring in my Senator Dallas Harris. Oh, perfect entrance. Welcome. Senator, thank you for joining us. Yesterday, unfortunately, the bill you and I have been working on all session, SB 171, along with AB 354 and 355 were vetoed yesterday by Governor Lombardo. Talk to us about what that was like. And we were about to have a press conference, and 5 minutes before we had to kind of change what we were doing and not ask him, but kind of shame him for what he did.
Yeah, it was a little bit of a shock.
Yeah.
You know, as you mentioned, we got it just about 5 minutes before we were going to go out there and make our best pitch to get him to sign it. It was kind of a little gut punch, I think, right? I mean, when you send a law and order governor a few bills that are going to be all about public safety, you kind of expect that he's going to sign, I don't know, at least one of them, right? Specifically to the bill that we were working on together, a lot of the arguments you often hear, like, oh, we're going to take guns away from law-abiding citizens, except our bill was about people who've been convicted of hate crimes, and not just any type of good old hate crime, right? But like violent hate crimes. And so I'm still a little confused about the whole thing.
Yeah. So tell people why we decided to do this. I think you and I had many conversations over the interim about this, but I think it really hit home when we got to the Buffalo shooting last year, which we just passed the 1-year anniversary from. And then we saw other shootings in, gay clubs and the Asian community. So many communities have been impacted by this violence. So talk to us about why this bill was important to you.
Yeah. Well, I think the most obvious reason is that I fit in a few of those vulnerable demographics, right? And, if someone wants to shoot me because I slept with their wife, that's an entirely different thing than if they just don't like the color of my skin or who I choose to love, right? I just think it's pretty anti-American to allow folks to carry guns around who are likely to shoot you because of an immutable characteristic, right? That is not freedom. That is the antithesis of freedom. And there's no way we can argue that we don't have a hate crime problem. I brought a bill last session to start reporting hate crimes to the FBI database. We know after the last guy was in the Oval Office, hate crimes skyrocketed, right? And so it just made sense to keep people safe by getting rid of access to guns for people who are committing hate crimes.
Absolutely. So what's next now? People are kind of confused about this process because, over the past couple of years with Governor Sisolak, we didn't see many vetoes, especially on priority bills like these. So what are the next steps for SB 171 potentially, and what might be the next steps for the Assembly on those bills as well?
Yeah. So, I'll speak for the Senate. I don't know if all y'all were watching the Senate floor today, right? But the majority leader made it very clear we're going to reconsider SB 171 as a special order of business on Monday. And so Republican senators are going to have another choice ahead of them. I don't know what choice they're going to make. Actually, I probably, unfortunately, do. But we're going to put this before them again and see if they really want to preserve Second Amendment rights for people who have committed hate crimes. That's their jam. We're going to find out on Monday.
So just to kind of close this up, as a person who is a part of the LGBTQ plus community, as a Black woman, do you see this as a slap in the face to all of the communities of color and all the people that this has impacted, especially the hate crimes bill? But we were talking about election workers. We've been talking about young people having kind of unfettered access to guns. To me, it was a slap in the face yesterday, but how do you feel?
Absolutely. I cannot understand why we need to guarantee that an 18-year-old has an AR-15. I know what the Constitution says. I went to law school. I also know that there weren't AR-15s when the Constitution was drafted. I also know that there are reasonable restrictions on every constitutional right. And if we can make sure that people commit domestic violence don't have access to guns. And if there are people who commit non-violent felonies who lose their Second Amendment right, committing a hate crime should definitely be on that list and is well within our constitutional rights to keep people safe. As a matter of fact, it's a dereliction of duty when we send you 3 very reasonable bills to keep your state's residents safe, and you say, nah, I'm good.
You brought up safety. This is a person who was the sheriff during 1 October in Clark County. he ran on public safety and keeping us all safe. In fact, he had one of those scare tactic ads of like, who do you want making decisions at night, Steve Sisolak or Joe Lombardo? I pick Steve Sisolak every time.
Yeah.
So I think this is also just a complete about face on what he ran on. I mean, these were public safety measures, in my opinion. So talk to us about, how this kind of goes against what he ran on.
Yeah. Joe Lombardo was a sheriff, but he's a politician now. That's clear. His job was to keep people safe. And, I'm not going to knock the job that he did as sheriff. I might have done it a little bit differently, but I don't have a law enforcement background. That's neither here nor there. But as governor, not starting off so great.
Yeah. So let's talk about that.
Okay.
The governor has been kind of mouthy this week about all the things. And I think yesterday was a good test of where he might fall on some of these really critical issues to Nevadans, because we are dealing with life and death matters in this building right now.
Right.
We're talking now, we're hearing him say that he's going to veto the budget with education in it, with infrastructure money in it, with mental health money in it, with special ed money in it, like all of the things that our communities rely on. What are you thinking right now in terms of hearing the governor say he might veto the budget, and how do we make sure that we're doing what's right for Nevadans? Because that should be all of our priority right now.
Yeah. Vetoing the budget would be a terrible idea. One of the things that I've always loved about Nevada is that our legislature does not operate in the same way that Congress does. Okay, let's leave those infinite continuing resolutions and government shutdowns and debt ceiling brink, negotiations to the federal level. Here in Nevada, we get things done for our people. That's always been the way that it's happened, and I'd be really sad to see that part of our effective state government go away to make some type of point. I don't even know what the point would be.
I mean, at this point, and this is my opinion, not hers, I feel like it's just a temper tantrum.
The way that it's happened,
and what he wants, and he's used to being able to do that because in law enforcement, that's kind of what you're able to do when you're the head of things, and not understanding that there are multiple branches of government that you have to work with and you have to negotiate with. This is all a negotiation. I mean, I was here when, Dina Titus and Barbara Buckley and Bill Raggio were here, and they all had to work together to get something done. Yeah. Last time the budget was vetoed was under Gibbons, and that was a nightmare, and they overrode it with a Republican Senate. So I just don't see kind of the end game here. If nothing else, it's bad for Nevadans.
Absolutely bad for Nevadans. We need to ensure that our state employees get paid, and that all of the state benefits that we have continue to operate. That's the least that our constituents expect of us, is to keep the government going. I don't know how he thinks it's a good idea to shut down the government in your very first legislative session.
Yeah, it seems like a bad idea to me.
The opposite of success.
Tomorrow's the deadline. What are the things you're watching? Any of the things that you're concerned about that folks at home should be watching? And then there's more coming next week, obviously, as we get towards the end of session. What should folks, your constituents at home, be watching?
Yeah, I would say keep an eye on this space. Battle in Progress is always pumping out lots of good information about things that are important and happening in this building. Bills are going to die. So if you got a bill that you love, go on to the personal legislative tracker, make sure that you're keeping an eye on it, make sure that it got work sessioned. If it hasn't, make sure you're reaching out to the chair of the committee where it's at. Don't forget, we're in opposite houses right now. So if it's an SB, it's probably in some assembly house or assembly committee. But reach out to the folks who know. I'm sure Battleborn has some great resources for you all if you're not familiar. But get educated, talk to your friends, reach out to committee members, let them know what you want to see get done.
Yeah, and then next week we move over to the floors, right? So Then everything's going to start focusing on floor session, multiple agendas a day. Some of the rules are going to get suspended. So what should folks kind of look for next week, and what should they know for next week?
Yep. Next week is going to be a lot less committee work. So if you've been watching committees in your pajamas, it's time to flip to the Senate floor where things are exciting. The Assembly floor can be a little, check out the upper chamber where we'll be passing bills. Keep an eye on those votes. And don't forget, it's still not too late to send messages to folks even next week to let them know how you want them to vote on the bills that are important to you.
One question from our audience, and then I'll let you go. Jerry Burton in the chat says, will any Republicans help overturn the veto on your bill? And what I think to add to that, what should people at home be doing, especially if they live in one of these Republicans districts?
Yeah, so I am not hopeful that we're going to get a Republican to overturn the veto. That does not mean it's impossible. It does not mean that it can't happen, but it does mean that we need a lot of work to go on. And so if you do live in a district with a Republican and you want to see this bill, or at least in the Senate, overwritten, this veto overwritten, call, text, email, and then call, text, and email again. I guarantee you the folks who love the fact that he vetoed this bill are reaching out. They're giving them pats on the back. We need to make sure they know that that is not where the majority of Nevadans sit. They need to hear from you. Let them know that votes like this have consequences. Your elected officials will respond to that. Let them know what you want to see from them, and hopefully we can get someone to be brave and do the right thing.
That's the goal. Thank you, as always. We appreciate you. We'll have you back before the end of session.
Yes, please.
All
Good
right.
to see y'all.
Thank you, Senator.
All right, thank you.
All right, I want to bring in Assemblywoman Gonzalez. Assemblywoman, welcome to the first episode of OYF. It's so nice to have you.
Hello, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited for this.
Thanks for rushing home to let Zero out so you could be on.
Oh, he's right here too. He
Zero's my favorite for all the viewers at home. Zero is the Assemblywoman's dog, and he spent lots of time with me during the pandemic delivering food to people. So,
he was so small then.
Thank you for being here. You were a second term legislator now. We spent a lot of time during your first term working together on progressive issues. You're working on a lot of important stuff this session too. Tell the viewers the district you represent, introduce yourself a little bit, and then kind of give the background on some of the key bills that you're working on this session.
Yeah, thank you so much. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Assemblywoman Cecilia Gonzalez, and I represent Assembly District 16. And my district actually changed pretty drastically during redistricting, which was in November of 2020. And so before the new district I represented the downtown area, the UNLV area, and now I represent more going like towards Henderson area. So I have the airport, I have Sunset Park, and it cuts off. It's a very great district. It also goes all the way up to I touch right on the border of the Spring Valley area, which is where I grew up. And so knocking on a lot of doors this last cycle. It was very heartening because I was knocking on a lot of doors of people whose like children I grew up with, and their folks still live in the district, and so that's very exciting. Some of the bills that I'm working on this legislative session, I'll probably give like my four big ones. So the first one is AB 292, and it is to enact what we are calling the Dignity for Incarcerated Women's Act. It's to provide sanitary products to folks right now. And I think in the hearing, it was stated that we had some of the highest costs for those products in the country. And so we're really looking at making sure that folks who menstruate aren't being financially penalized, and if they don't or cannot afford it, right? And making sure that they're high quality, right? The bill also talks about preventative care, things like making sure you're getting your pap smears, making sure you're getting your yearly breast screenings, right? What we know is that majority of folks who are incarcerated come home, and a lot of the times they are not getting access to these yearly preventative measures that we need to have to prevent us from having things like breast cancer, things like cervical cancer, colon cancer. We're also looking at it for the men's prison as well. And then another bill that I'm working on AB 192, and it is to address the fact that during the last 2-3 election cycles, we've had a lot of issues with not addressing or not having standardized you can electioneer here or you cannot electioneer signs, along with the conversation about like election safety and threats and things like that. I think that it's really important for us to have a very visual, large marker of like, this is where the line is and this is where you cannot electioneer. Some of the examples throughout the election, we saw, sticky notes on trees. We saw paper on trees where folks are just not able to see that. And then the bill also addresses during the cycle, we had, I think it was 1 or 2 mail-in ballot contracts that were withdrawn because of the small population in those counties. And so this bill is also seeking for us to move to a statewide contract and have mail-in ballots as similar as possible, especially when we're talking about disseminating information to voters, getting folks in and voting. When every county kind of has their little thing that they're doing differently, it kind of makes it hard. So this is hopefully to really clean that process up. And then another bill that I'm working on that I'm really excited about is AB 336, which is the driver's authorization card bill, and it is to extend the renewal time to parity that of a driver's license. So what's currently happening now is driver authorization cards have a renewal of, I think in the beginning it was 2 years. I think right now it's 4 years. And what we're doing is seeking to have parity with driver's license renewals, which is an 8-year renewal right now. I'm really excited about that bill. It keeps people out of the DMV. We've also talked about making sure that folks can access all of that like online as well. So I'm really looking forward to that process as well. And you asked me one more thing. Oh, a little bit about myself. So for folks that don't know, I worked and I've been a longtime community volunteer organizer, working on different issues, gun violence reform, criminal justice reform, reproductive health, addressing things like intimate partner violence, the environment. And that's kind of how I landed here, was through a lot of these organizations having lobby days and me getting that FaceTime with lawmakers, going and testifying on bills, organizing on how do we get people to testify on. And then also really, I think what was really full circle was after folks passed legislation with like Plan and the Mass Liberation Project, we would go out there and then like tell people the laws. And it was really awesome because while I was knocking doors, there were a few times where people would say, oh, I can't vote, I have a felony conviction. And it was so awesome to be like, oh, actually, we worked on this, you can vote. And I really enjoyed that part. And so now I'm just rambling. So
you're not rambling. That's awesome. I want to ask you about AB 193. That's relating to the interrogation of a minor. Tell us more about that and why our communities need that bill.
Yeah, so that hearing was today in the Senate. It was definitely longer than I thought it was going to be. And why this is so important is because across the country, one of the number one ways that people are exonerated is through DNA evidence, but also through false confessions that come out years later, right, that are litigated for decades to find out this information. And so what AB 193 seeks to do is it seeks to prevent all of this from happening within the juvenile population. I think that other states are maybe looking, I think it was Vermont, I want to say, is looking at 21 and under, but through so much research, we know that juveniles' brains are not developed, right, to where they can be harmed from people that are misrepresenting information. We'll look at the Central Park 5 case, right? 5 Black men were incarcerated for decades because they were wrongfully accused, number one, but they were also provided interrogation tactics that involved lying to them about evidence, about information. Oh, we have your friend in the other room who's letting us know, you guys did this, right? And so, it's really about justice, and it's really about making sure everyone is getting that right, or not right, but equal experiences when they have to be involved in the justice system. And it's also a preventative measure. We also look at the Khalif Browder case, right? That wasn't a murder case, and he was incarcerated and lied to by police over saying that there was evidence that he had stolen a backpack. And so I think that this is a very important bill, and I'm very excited to be working on this.
So that I wanted to make sure we hit on that bill because I knew the hearing was this morning and we were participating in that. And it's one of the bills that we're supporting because it's a great piece of legislation. So for those maybe who've never been through legislative session before, this is maybe their second time like it's yours. What's the next step for a bill like that? Obviously, you got the hearing today, but talk to us how that interacts with the deadline and how that'll interact now with the floor deadline and all of that, just so folks know the process and can follow along with a bill like that.
Yeah, thanks for the question. So what is happening right now is second House committee deadline, which means that your bill has to make it out of the second House's committee. And so for folks that don't know, when you have a bill, it gets referred to a committee. The committee hears the bill and then they vote to move it to the floor, in which everyone who's not in that committee can vote. And so right now what has to happen is, so we have reached an agreement with the district attorney's office that happened shortly after the hearing because of the hearing, which is why these hearings are important to have these conversations, right? And so with that, I just sent the conceptual amendment to the chair. And so what needs to happen now is that the committee needs to adopt the amendment in the work session. And then it has to be work session. I guess these kind of happen at the same time, or I think, at this point, it would happen at the work session. And from there, the amendment would then be adopted to be then voted on the floor, which means next week, after the committee deadline, your bill now has to make second House passage deadline, which means after the committee, it now has to make it out of the second House and return back to your House. What can happen is things can be added to a bill in the second House and the first House doesn't agree. And then we have to have a conversation, which is typically called a conference committee. And that is where we kind of hash out, okay, what are we going to accept? What are we not going to accept? If we don't come to an agreement, what happens from there?
I think conference committees might be my favorite part of session because things just now get wild, especially once they suspend the rules and we're running around literally everywhere in this building. Donna, who's watching, was like, "You're sick," because I was like, "This is my favorite part of session. I can't even lie." And I know that sounds horrible because everybody's so miserable, but this is when I don't know.
No, and they happen in the hallways, they're just, we're in a conference committee right now. I'm everyone's walking by, and so it is pretty crazy. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's kind of where all the sausage is made, and it's where the chess starts. It's the fun part of session. So Donna, I know you're at home watching. You can make fun of me all day, but I love this part. She does too. So, Assemblywoman, you have been through 2 regular sessions now, 1 special session. Can you just provide some guidance and insight for folks who would like to become legislators? And what have been your biggest takeaways from the past 2 sessions as a legislator?
Ooh, load of questions. So becoming a legislator, I would say, I think for me, I was very unique in the fact that I had worked 2 campaign election cycles before I decided to run for office. And so running for office for me was a little, it was difficult. I'm not here to say it was easy, but I didn't have to hire a field expert, a data expert. I was able to do all of that myself. And so I think if you want to run for office, getting involved at any part of the legislative process, the campaign process, it will all help you, right? When I decided to run for office, there were a few legislators that I reached out to that was okay, this is what you need to do. I talk about Senator Wynn being my mentor all the time and how really me getting not pinned, but her telling me hey, this person's not running for the seat, you should run for it. And how that conversation happened was literally after an interim judiciary committee. And I was going to the committee hearings in the interim. And it just was because I was so passionate about, we were talking about the cash bail stuff. This was all back in, 2019, 2020 interim. And just being involved, right? I think that also helped with just the endorsement process. Was I didn't have these big powerful connections, you would say. I didn't get the caucus endorsement when I went for it, right? It was an open seat. And having a lot of the community support actually is what really helped me get through all the things that I didn't know. And what I will say about what I have taken away from being a legislator is that so when I decided to run for office, I put a sticky note on my computer screen and I said, running for office is a sacrifice. And I didn't at the time really know what that meant. I knew what it meant of like these long hours, knocking doors, right? But I didn't really understand. And I would say like being a legislator, I think we don't talk about that, the unsexy parts about being a legislator, right? The hard votes that you have to take when you have these relationships with your friends and you want to help your friends, but sometimes you disagree, and that's difficult, right? To have those conversations. Sometimes it's a bill where you're like, I don't know how I feel about this and I don't want to vote for it, right? It's very like, these aren't easy parts. And kind of what Senator Harris was saying was there's a difference between being a candidate and being an elected politician, right? Like there is a difference there, right? And so I would say the sacrifice part is what I didn't really understand in the beginning, right? Like sacrificing your time, sacrificing your friends, sacrificing like your personal image, right? There are things on Facebook, on my family members' pages where I was like, you have to delete this because at the end of the day, it comes back on me, right? Or like having those conversations, like with my husband, like he loves posting dumb stuff on Facebook and that's his right. And that's what, some of us go to social media for. But some things I'm like, hey, can you like take that down? Cause like, politically, this would be really bad on me, right? And those are sacrifices and being like your own person or having your free thought. Like I can't just, say how I feel on social media, although I have done that and have been in trouble for that. And I've learned from that, right? So it's just, a lot of sacrifices that we don't talk about. How are you going to pay your bills, right? For me, I don't, I think I kind of like threw a wrench in my career with running for office so early. I don't have this like long-standing career. I've been a student forever. I'm an educator and I'm getting my PhD, right? But again, like, for the everyday person that wants to run for office, like those are things you have to think about. Like, how am I going to care for my family? The legislators that have children, like power to them, because I'm struggling with not seeing like my puppy on the weekends, right? I couldn't imagine like having kids and like dealing and juggling with all the things of outside of that building. So I definitely think that the sacrifices is a thing that I'm still like processing and learning.
Yeah, after my 10th session now, I think I finally got the hang of the sacrifice, but it's a real thing, an absolutely real thing. 2 questions from the audience, and I know you've got to come back here, so I'll let you hop, but 2 questions from the audience. Jerry asked, any news on AB 292? Last we heard it was in Ways and Means.
Yeah, so AB 292 is still in Ways and Means right now. So typically what happens is by the Constitution, we have to fund government and education. Like those are the things that we have to do. Everything else is like secondary to that. That is why we are elected. That is why we come to this building. The issue that we have is kind of like what you were talking about with Senator Harris, is this rumor that the governor is going to veto the budget. If that happens, there is enough time for us to fix that. Thank goodness to our amazing Democratic leadership, both in the Assembly and the Senate. If that happens, though, I imagine, and I don't know if this is accurate, I feel that they would have to address that first, right, before we address anything else. And so we're kind of waiting for that to play out. The chair of Ways and Means has started hearing other bills. And I know that because I was in their committee earlier this week for another bill. And so moving forward, once all of this kind of happens, then we are able to have conversations about other things and we'll be up for a hearing. It is, to my knowledge, it has not gotten a hearing. And so I have not heard that it will not get a hearing. I think I just used 2 negatives. Sorry about that. So pretty much long-winded to say, when the chair of Ways and Means is ready for us to have a hearing, we will present, this is the bill, this is the fiscal note, this is the ask. And we will go from there. Luckily, because it is in Ways and Means, it's exempted from all of these deadlines. And so we do have a little time to work on it still. That was a really long answer. I'm sorry.
No, it was a good one, though. And actually, we've got a couple on this in the chat. So if a bill is not exempt, what happens tomorrow? If it doesn't get a hearing and then it doesn't subsequently get work session, what happens tomorrow?
That's a great question. So the bill is dead, unfortunately. We have 24 hours about roughly to hear bills, not only to hear them, but to move them, which is why, last session I had this problem where, my hearing was like on deadline day or the day before, very much similar to this bill. But that's one of the things of like, the structure of the 120-day session that makes this very difficult sometimes is that we only have a limited time to talk about policy and what we're going to move forward. And so some chairs, simply don't have the time to hear, all the bills that are currently in the committee. And it's, unfortunate, but it's the process that we have on our Constitution for the last however many years we've been a state.
Well, Assemblywoman, thank you so much. How can people at home, your constituents, help you as we come to the end of session? And how can they get in touch with you since this is the first time on our show?
Yeah, so I'm very accessible. I would say that that's very unique to the Nevada legislature. And I want to say just our electeds in general, right? Congress, all our congressional delegates are very accessible. I think we're just unique in Nevada that way. My phone number's out there. My cell phone's out there. It's not hard to get. So if you want to reach me, you can definitely, get my phone, get my office number, get my email. I'm crazy a little bit and I don't put filters on my emails because I put a filter on my email and then I started getting like blocks from like the Secretary of State's office. So I took all the filters off my email. So if you email me to my legislative email, I will see it. Some other legislators, have their attachés read emails, but social media is also a way to get in touch. I would say mainly like Twitter. I kind of don't, or maybe Instagram. I don't really check all the other social medias, but social media is a way to get in contact. Email, call, text. And I would say at this point, definitely call your legislators to let them know about critical bills that are still out there that, you have a strong opinion of and want to fight for.
One other question,
Yeah, anytime. I'm not in a rush.
Being an advocate and being on my side of things or our side of things at BBP and then making that transition to being an actual legislator, what would you tell the advocates at home who are watching, especially about this process right now? Because I don't know about you, but I think that you all would prefer to hear from them over me. But that's just my assumption at this point, because I'm paid to talk to you.
Yeah, I think like one of the best parts about the job is talking to our constituents. And I think like when we do get email blasts, it's at least I try my best to respond to those who are my constituents to let them know, like, I see your address. I see that you live in my district. I represent you. I want you to know, that I hear you and that I'm listening to your concerns, whether we agree or disagree. I think that it can get super overwhelming. Okay, so for example, like this last 24 hours, I probably received over probably like 2,000, maybe even 3,000 emails about the teachers' time for 20, right? I guarantee you those 20,000 to 2,000 emails, right? Maybe 500 of them or less are from people from my district. And so I think like for us, like we really want to hear from people from our district. We really want to hear about what the everyday Nevadan who's out there that are going to be impacted by these issues has to say, right? And we really appreciate that. So don't be scared to call your legislator. I know it can seem intimidating. I know that like testifying on like the record can be very intimidating, but we're everyday people like you all, and we love to hear from you.
Awesome. Thank you, Assemblywoman, and thank you, Zero, for being on today. We always appreciate your participation. And you're welcome back anytime, especially as we wrap up session. Thank you for all you're doing.
Yeah, thank you so much. I appreciate it. Thank you for having me as a guest, and anything you need, please reach out. And like I said, for folks that are watching, if you would like to reach out, even if I'm not your legislator, if you need me to connect you with your legislator, we're very accessible. And so definitely take advantage of that.
Awesome. Thank you, Assemblywoman. We'll see you soon. Have a great evening.
Bye.
We appreciate you. All right, now, the man of the hour, Steve Sebelius, is on with me. This is going to be a height challenge because he's very tall and I'm very short. So we're going to make this work.
Yeah, it'll work.
Just going to like be floating heads. It's fine. Steve, welcome back to the show. Steve, you're with the RJ. You're up here covering session. You are one of my very dear friends. We talk shit in the hallways. Talk to us about what's going on here in the building and kind of the vibe and the mood right now.
Yeah, it felt like through the session that really not a lot was getting done.
Yes.
And I've actually proved that through research. The research division of the Legislative Council Bureau was very good researchers were able to put together a comparison through day 100 of the session. And it turns out, in fact, not just a feeling, there were fewer bills passed during this legislature than any other legislature for the past since 1999
Well,
to the present.
horrifying.
It is going slow. There are hundreds of bills left to go.
Yep.
9 bills have been signed as we stand here tonight and talk. 3 vetoed. So that's still just a handful of bills of all the ones that have yet to come. The budget bills and policy bills that you've been talking about on the show tonight and throughout the session. So there's a lot of work left to be done. The thinking is now that a special session is almost inevitable, and the governor's threat to veto the budget if he doesn't get what he wants is hanging over everything. Although he did say in the Review Journal that he was not going to use the veto as a big hammer to get things that he wants. So apparently,
Do you believe that?
I don't. I think any governor would be foolish to not use the veto as a big hammer to get whatever they want. So there's also been like a lack of real negotiations over really specific details.
Right.
They have been talking. They meet for breakfast. I didn't know this till this week. They meet for breakfast every Wednesday at the governor's mansion. But they haven't been talking the details of bills. You know, what are you willing to live with? What are you willing to live without?
So they just yucking it up?
Apparently
pancakes?
Apparently so. Yeah, exactly. So it is, it's
Any
mystifying.
word of if he's Teresa Giudice the table yet?
Yeah, I don't know.
Okay, so we're getting to the late stage of session. It's funny because I told Maria yesterday, I felt the energy kind of shift in the building yesterday. It was like kind of ho-hum at the beginning of the week, and then all of a sudden it was like, holy crap, we have all this work to do. We better get on it, right? Yeah. So do you think they pass the budget quickly now to get it over to the governor before session ends so that they have time to override a veto potentially? And do they have the votes to do that?
I think it kind of depends on the meetings that the governor's having with the Republicans. But they only need one vote to override a veto, one vote in the state Senate. And there are people in the state Senate who want a political future. So I think it's gettable, so long as what they're doing is a reasonable thing. If the governor is being unreasonable, I think there's a chance to get a Republican vote. But if he is standing on principle, something they all agree with, then that's a different story.
So we've talked a lot about this. I think the most comparable session to this session, in my mind, it was a little bit different makeup, but the most comparable is 2007, when I worked for Congresswoman Titus, when she was the minority leader. Bill Raggio and the Republicans led the Senate. Barbara Buckley and the Democrats led the Assembly. But they had to override Gibbons' vetoes on 2 of the critical budget bills from what I remember. And so they were able to do that because they got the budget done quickly and they were able to override those vetoes. Do you feel like we can have that bipartisanship and get that done similar to 2007? Well,
first, I think Governor Lombardo does not want to be compared to Governor Gibbons.
Oh, well, good to know. We'll note that.
When you have the scale of governors, you have Gibbons on the low end and we'll say Sandoval on the high end. And he wants to be as close to Sandoval as possible and as far from Gibbons as possible. Jim Gibbons had, at the time, I believe, a record number of vetoes, but there was also a record number of veto overrides. Now, Governor Sandoval subsequently surpassed his record of vetoes, but not a single Sandoval veto was ever overridden.
Interesting.
And so Gibbons had almost all of his vetoes overridden, and the budget was a good example of that. So yeah, there are some parallels to that session, because you have somebody who had. Although Governor Gibbons had an advantage, I think, even over Governor Lombardo, he had served in a legislative capacity. He understood the legislative process and the separation of powers. It's ironic enough, because I've talked to both sides, and I think the Democrats are saying the governor doesn't understand that we're a separate and co-equal branch of government. He's giving us these policy bills and saying, pass this. And he won't say what part of it he's willing to live without. But the governor, from his perspective, is saying, the legislature doesn't understand that there is now a divided government, that there is a Republican in the governor's mansion, and they need to move differently than they did when there was a Democrat. Now, I know that Governor Sisolak, when he was here, would tell the legislative leaders, look, this bill is okay, but this part of this bill is really going to be problematic for me to sign. If you can eliminate that, I can sign the bill. And so there were negotiations that went on, and they would take out parts that he found difficult to swallow, and they would pass legislation. Those conversations have not happened, from what I understand. in the current setup. So I think they're going to have to start pretty soon, because we don't want to see a session where the budget gets passed, Governor Lombardo signs it and lets all the other policy bills die. There's a lot of policy bills that need to be passed. The legislature's really only constitutional obligation is to pass the budget. If they do that, they've done their job, and he could send them home and say, well, okay, better luck next time in 2025. I hope that doesn't happen for a couple of reasons, the most prominent of which is they need to learn to work together for the coming session. Governor Lombardo will be the governor of the coming session. Democrats may have a supermajority in that sense. And one person did tell me that there might be a strategy going on, that they hold a number of bills until the very, very, very end of the session, pass them. The governor vetoes them, but in that instance, after the legislature has adjourned, those bills return to the 2025 session. If they have a supermajority, they can override all the vetoes of the bills that they really wanted, and the governor's veto pen becomes moot. So I don't know if that's going on. I don't know if that's entered the thinking. There's a lot of strategic thinkers in this building. I'm sure it's occurred to more than one person. So again, they need to learn to work together if they're going to be successful in doing anything with the bare minimum.
All right. So we've talked about the budget. We've talked about the vetoes. Let's talk about the 3 vetoes yesterday and my proud distinction of I had the first vetoes of session on my priority bills. I was a little bit shocked. It was a new thing for me to claim as the worst person in Nevada. So what did you think about those vetoes? I mean, I wasn't exactly shocked by them. I was disappointed. I don't understand the strategy behind doing it 5 minutes before a press conference where we're going to blast you, but
probably why.
What do you think the calculus behind him vetoing those, especially since we know overwhelmingly Nevadans and gun owners support those types of measures?
Yeah, he made a gamely effort to suggest that there were constitutional problems with those vetoes. But no less a personage than former Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia wrote in the seminal case on gun rights, District of Columbia v. Heller, that nothing in that decision, which found an individual right to own a firearm unconnected with service in the militia, which is a neat trick given the preface of that amendment, that doesn't mean that every law passed is unconstitutional. And he specifically said laws that govern the commercial sale of firearms, one of those bills did, prevented the sale of firearms to people under 21, that sensitive places, guns could be prohibited in sensitive places, as they are, I might note, in the building that we're standing in right now, and in the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department headquarters.
And in the governor's office.
There's a no gun sign on every door at the Metro headquarters. So for 8 years, Governor Lombardo went into a gun-free zone, yet he denounced it in one of the budget or one of the veto messages. And then the hate crime legislation, which I think Senator Harris probably said it best, but if we are to prohibit firearms, probably a good place to start is people who have committed violent crimes against people solely on the basis of immutable characteristics, solely on the basis of the fact that they don't like a racial or ethnic minority, someone whose gender identity or expression, it doesn't match up with their values. So these 3 bills were fairly common sense bills. I think he could have probably signed at least 2 of them and been in good standing with his party and with the reasonable people in his party. But I think these were sort of sending a signal to the people in the base that basically said, no, I'm here, I'm going to defend gun rights and whatnot. And as a lifetime police officer, as a sheriff who oversaw the Metropolitan Police Department on probably the worst night in its modern history, with the worst mass shooting in American history, I would think that he would have a more acute concern for the epidemic of gun violence. Senator Harris said it. There is no place safe. You can't. Where can you think of that has not seen gun violence? There's a restaurant, an IHOP, just down the street from where we're standing right now. That was a site of a mass shooting. The Strip during the Route 91 Harvest Music Festival, site of a mass shooting. Shootings have occurred in churches and diners and movie theaters. There really is no place for that. We even saw a riot that went into the Capitol that thankfully did not have rioters who were armed. And that's just a miracle that it hasn't happened. Governor Lombardo said in one of his veto messages that there hasn't been a mass shooting at an election center. And that has to be suffixed with the word yet, because it's a miracle, in my opinion, that has not happened yet, especially with people in the Republican Party who have insisted that the election was stolen and that the election workers who were working in those buildings were complicit in that. So I think it's unfortunate that those bills were vetoed. I think there was a way, if he didn't like it the way as written, I think there was a way to negotiate something to come off all three of those bills, and that just didn't happen. And that's, I think, unfortunate.
I think it's more than unfortunate. It was very despicable yesterday, because we were very strategic in the bills that we picked to run this session, knowing who the governor was. And we were trying to be respectful of that, knowing that we should go more with the safety angle, less maybe with some of the other angles that we would typically go with for gun violence prevention. And my thought process was, if you can veto a hate crimes bill, like, you surely can't do that. I mean, this is a limited number of people who have been convicted of hate crimes, and you shouldn't want them to have guns. As somebody in law enforcement, you should not want those people to have guns. They are harmful.
Well, I would think, a lot of police officers are Republicans. A lot of police officers are gun people because of the nature of their jobs and the tools that they use. But I think a lot of police officers also are not really sanguine with the idea of a lot of people having guns. Every traffic stop they make, every domestic violence call they answer, every situation that they roll up on could result in a fatal shooting, as has happened with Metropolitan Police officers within the last 12 months in Las Vegas. So I would think that there would be a greater desire to make sure that we do everything possible to keep guns out of the hands of people who are not eligible to have them. A felon can't have a gun. Somebody who's been convicted of domestic violence can't have a gun. Someone who's been adjudicated mentally ill can't have a gun. Violent offenders can't have guns. And I think that there is room to expand that list. And in the name of safety, you're never going to get 100% safe. There are more guns than people in America, and there's no way to get all of those back. So they're always going to be out there. But there are things that we can do, like universal background checks, which we have in Nevada, like making sure that every gun sale is subject to a background check, which we have. So I think all those things are good things. Progress has been made, but obviously there's more work to do.
Absolutely. Okay, so Brian in the chat is chomping at the bit to get the A's question asked.
The A's, yes.
He's so excited about this question. So on a scale of 1 to Faraday, how bad is the A's deal? That is Brian talking.
Well, the Faraday deal remains in the realm of the hypothetical, since they did not do it. Interestingly enough, the Faraday deal is actually an example of economic development that works well, because they had standards that they had to meet. And when they did not meet those standards, it became clear to all of us that they weren't ever going to be a serious contender for those tax breaks. So that was a good thing. I'm glad those standards were in there. I'm glad the clawbacks are in there, so that we can make sure that we don't have companies like that are going to fizzle on. Now, the A's, as everyone knows, are not a very good ball team at the present time. Draw fewer spectators than the Las Vegas Aviators. And some people have wondered, well, why can't they just play at the Las Vegas ballpark? Their fans will fit in there. I think if you're going to do economic development for a project like this, doing it in this way, this is probably, of all the ways that you could do it, this is probably the least offensive, in as much as you create a district and the people who go to the stadium will pay off the bonds. Now that assumes people are going to go to the stadium.
Right.
And there is also the other piece of state transferable tax credits, which we are really running out of, because, I mean, how many of those are left after we have a proposal for movie theaters or movie production houses in Las Vegas to the tune of $4.6 to $4.8 billion. That's a lot of transferable tax credits. So I wonder if, how many checks we have left in the state checkbook. But the A's thing is, and there's resistance now. There's resistance to doing it, both in this building down in Clark County Government Center as well. We expected the bill to be introduced yesterday. We expected it to be introduced today. Now I'm hearing it and it won't be introduced till next week.
Yep.
So that tells me that the details have not been worked out. And probably partially it's logistical and technical in terms of the financing, but also partly I think it's political, because you have lawmakers who don't want to be tagged with yet another thing. We had Tesla, we had Apple, we had Faraday, which didn't work out. We had the Raider Stadium, and all of these things add up after a while. And there are some constituents who are saying, look, I'm struggling. The price of gas, the price of food, and yet here you're giving millions of dollars, almost $500 million in the original iteration of the plan, to now about $400 million, to even now $200 million, somewhere in there. But that's still a lot of money. I could live on $200 million. And so people are skeptical, I think, of that part.
So the part that actually gives me pause on the stadium in particular is the fact that, with the Allegiant Stadium deal, it was backed by the room tax. Now they're talking about this special tax district that would, pay for the bonds. But that's a huge risk when you don't know that that's guaranteed money coming in,
right?
Which means that you're essentially putting the county at risk for all of the bonds, right?
Yeah.
These bonds are not backed by any solid revenue source. And the governor has said he's not creating new revenue sources. He's not raising taxes, even though he kind of is by doing this. So these bonds will really be footed by the county, by Clark County. This seems far, and we were opposed clearly to the Allegiant Stadium, but this seems even more risky than that stadium.
Yeah, I mean, this type of financing is done in a slightly different way in every redevelopment agency in the state. So you have downtown Las Vegas and portions of West Las Vegas. They have they cap the taxes, the property taxes, at the level that they were when they created it. I think this is going back, taxing my memory now, but it's going back to the mid 90s. And then the increment, the increase over and beyond from when they started, it goes back into the agency and they do projects with that. What happens to Las Vegas is, some of the most valuable real estate in the city is
especially this particular plot of land.
Exactly. So that is really doing it. So the question is, will the A's be able to do it? Now, the arguments in favor of that are like, look, yes, the A's are bad, but all the other teams in the league are going to come here at one point. So Cubs fans will go. Angels fans like myself will go. People who are fans of San Diego will go to those games and produce that revenue. And it is hoped produce enough revenue to pay off those bonds. I think the county's heartburn is exactly what you said. They're worried that the visitation and the sales. Now, in the A's, there is a difference in the A's. All taxes, not just property, but all taxes will be diverted into this stadium district. But the county is still worried that's not going to cover the bonds. It's not going to cover the interest, not going to cover the bonds, and that the general fund will be on the hook. If that were to happen, if the general fund were to have to be tapped to pay for this, I think the career of every single member of the county commission who voted for this, if they are still in office at the time, will be over.
100%.
That is something that voters will just not tolerate. I think they're getting sick of a lot of these things. They're getting sick of, this endless building without water. And they realize, Las Vegas, wants to be the home of sports. But is it worth it? Is this something that we can do? Should we wait for an expansion team? I don't think that's a viable alternative, but that's definitely a concern. And I think that's the concern the county is expressing behind the scenes as they negotiate over this pact.
I think the other thing that I'm concerned about, and we saw this play out in the Allegiant deal, is what about all of the unseen, kind of behind the scenes things that have to go into building a stadium, right? It's not just the stadium that the county will end up being on the hook for. It's all the infrastructure around that stadium. It's the roads, because this is a very busy street corner with lots of different arenas on all 4 street corners. You've got the parking you have to think about. You've got the transportation of, people across the streets. I mean, there's a whole bunch of logistical issues that were a nightmare and still are a nightmare for Allegiant Stadium now that will play out with this as well, because it's landlocked. It's right by the airport, and there's no expanding past that plot of land.
Right, exactly. And the A's will only use a small part of this plot of land. The Bally's will be able to build hotels on the rest of the property. Those hotels, by the way, will be outside of the stadium district. They will not be contributing
Interesting.
to the stadium. It will just be the stadium. The traffic issue you raised is a good issue. I think it is, traffic is going to be terrible there. It's terrible there now. It will be terrible there when this happens. Probably even worse when it happens. Building things and ignoring the impacts that happen is what some people might call the Nevada way of doing business. And I think the same is true here. When you think about it, Las Vegas is probably the biggest capital of recycling, because we recycle the same 4-mile piece of land, every few years. We implode and rebuild, and that's what's going to happen here. The Tropicana, it's now their turn to implode and rebuild, and we just build and rebuild on the same 4 miles. We're not adding infrastructure. We're not adding roadway. We're adding people. And this will surely bring in a lot of people. That is what they're trying to sell this on. They basically say, okay, the stadium itself, hopefully it's going to pay for itself with the visitors, but those visitors will stay at a hotel and pay room tax. They will go to restaurants and pay sales tax. They will rent a car and pay all the different fees associated with renting a car. And they will spend money in the casinos while they're here. And that will have what the economic impact, or what the economists call the incremental economic impact. That's people who come here for this who would not otherwise have come here. Now, is that going to happen? Who knows? I mean, the people who analyze this say yes. They have talents in mathematics that I don't have, and maybe talents in prognostication that I don't have. They say yes. I think it remains to be seen. The Raiders Stadium has done extraordinarily well in that area, and so it remains to be seen. The A's could do that as well when they have other events besides baseball games, although there will be a lot of them. They could host concerts. This could fit in. T-Mobile is about 18,000. This would be about 30,000. Allegiant Stadium is about 65,000. So we will have now a venue for, low level, mid level, big concerts as well. So we could fit into that. And it might, my hope eventually is that they have not only one, but both political conventions in Las Vegas in the same year. I think that would be fantastic. This would be a great venue for it. Unfortunately, the conventions happen in the summer, and that's when the boys of summer are playing their games. So we probably won't be able to use the A stadium for that. We'll probably have to go over to Elite.
Oh, why would you wish that on us? It sounds terrible to have the RNC there.
It's the only way I'll ever go to another convention again, because I am just not going to travel.
Yeah, people, I know.
Yeah.
One of the other questions I was going to ask you is, and this is something that I've been kind of fascinated with, is this notion that with the Allegiant Stadium, the county was on board. They were ready to go. In fact, Steve Sisolak flew up here and was promoting it before he was governor.
Oh, yeah.
This is very different.
Yes.
The county is not all in, from what I've been told.
That's right.
And it's almost as if the state is forcing the county to do this.
Even some people in the state, some people here in this building reacted very skeptically to this. There was not a warm embrace. It was completely different from the Raiders experience, where the county commission was cheerleading almost literally for the Allegiant Stadium, was willing to come up here and impose a special tax just to get that stadium. Now you have a governor who wouldn't approve a tax if it would cure cancer. He would say no to a tax. Now you have state lawmakers who are now looking at the different things that have come in, what we're giving away to F1, what we're giving away in sponsorships to all sorts of sports, the ones you've heard about and the ones that you probably haven't heard about. And they're wondering, okay, at what point do we not do this? At what point do we say no? And the danger of saying no, of course, is that some other state will get it. And there are people in this building who say, okay, fine, that's fine, let them have it, because it's what we're being asked to give up is too much. There are other people who say, look, what we're being asked to give up, this is an investment and it's going to pay off the way the Raider Stadium has mostly paid off. There was some lean years during the pandemic where they did not produce the revenue that that they wanted to. The Raiders aren't that great a team either, frankly.
No, they're
So
not.
it's
I'm also tired of recycling old teams that are kind of bad.
right, exactly. But look, we're not going to get the Padres. We're not going to get the Angels. So I mean, that's
So this is what we get as the bottom of the barrel.
This is
This
what
is
we
the
get.
Nevada way, the lowest.
The Nevada way. And it's funny you should mention that because you've been here during the boom years of the Rebels.
Yep.
Right. And you could not get a seat in the Thomas and Mack when the Rebels were hot and Jerry Tarkane was the coach. If you paid thousands of dollars, you couldn't find a seat.
Yeah.
He left, they started to suck. And what happened?
Now they're begging people to go.
They would almost pay you
Yeah.
to go to games just so there would be a crowd in the stands to do it. Vegas hates a loser. So the Raiders and the A's, if they move here, they have got to get better because if they don't, Vegas will
We'll root
not
against them
turn out.
actively.
Yes,
Yes.
absolutely.
I mean, that's what I do on a regular basis with the Raiders we're talking about.
And then how much can they sell tickets for if that happens? And the lower the ticket price, the more they have to give away to get you in that stadium, the more they are in jeopardy of not being able to pay those bonds.
And also, let's just talk about the fact that none of these stadiums are subject to the live entertainment tax.
Right.
So that is not going to bring in any revenue for the state either.
Now, perhaps if an amendment could be brought to the bill that we have yet to see and say, in this instance, perhaps the live entertainment tax will apply. That would be an interesting thing because remember, it would go back into the stadium district.
Right.
So any tax you impose there could be a hot dog tax. I'm against that, of course. But
Priorities.
If there was, all of that would go back into it. But you're right, there is no live entertainment tax for live sporting events. There would be for a concert. Like if you had a concert, let's see, who's a 30,000 seat concert person? What would you say? Maybe Huey Lewis.
Killers.
Huey Lewis. Would Huey Lewis get 30,000?
I don't even know who that is.
I first saw Huey Lewis in the Fabulous Forum in Inglewood, California, and he got more than 30,000 into that place. I think he can still pull it off.
Probably.
But anyway, he would be subject to the live entertainment tax. Anything that goes on there that's not a live sporting event would be subject to that. We'll go back in there. So a lot of it depends on what they can program in there.
I've heard the list isn't very good.
Yeah, it's again, this is not by any means a done deal.
Yeah.
But like I said, if you're going to do a deal like this, what better way to do it than say, okay, this area, people who go there and spend money, they're the ones who are going to pay for it.
You want me to tell you the better way to do it?
Is to not do it?
To not do it and have them pay for their own damn stadium.
Now that would be
That's
terrific.
the ideal way to do it.
And I've asked many times, why couldn't a multi-million-dollar organization such as Major League Baseball lay out the money for this? And you know what the answer is? The answer is not only will they not, even though they could, but they specifically demand a public participation in this for precedential reasons. If they paid for the stadium in Las Vegas, when the next stadium, Tampa, for example, we've got an old stadium, we need to redo it.
Which, by the way, that stadium's books were cooked and closed to the public. And when we were doing research on the stadium in 2016, that was actually the example we brought up because that stadium actually was underwater for a long time.
Exactly. And so now they want a new stadium.
I'm sure.
The Annette Magnus of Tampa, whoever that might be, will get up and say, look, they paid for Vegas. Why shouldn't they pay for us?
Yeah.
And then every subsequent stadium will say that. So Major League Baseball has a demand that you have to have a public participation of this. So now Nevada has, let's be honest, Nevada has decided we are going to play in this arena.
Yeah.
That ship has sailed. So it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of how much. And and also the details that you raised, how much and what protections are in place for the local governments. Because I think the worst case scenario would be they come, they build it. The stadium district does not generate the tax revenue that was anticipated, even with all the programming and all the events that happen in it. And they have to turn to the county general fund to do it. That could be an anchor, a weight on the county budget. And that I don't think voters would forgive.
No. And 200 million of $1 billion budget. I mean, that's a big chunk of money.
It is. Like I said, I could live on $200 million.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So before we go, because I know we're getting late, I do want to talk about the Sony deal really quickly, because I think that's another creative nightmare that's coming out of this session.
I mean, this is 1.5 billion. That's 4.8 billion
Yeah.
over 20 years.
Yeah.
But still,
That's a lot of money for a state like
I could
ours.
also live on 4.8 billion.
Forever.
Yeah.
Forever and ever.
Yeah. True.
So talk to us about that deal, because that's kind of unprecedented and uncharted territory. We oppose that deal too, because once again, we don't believe public money should go to multi-billion-dollar corporations. Especially when so many Nevadans are struggling to just make ends meet, still coming out of the pandemic, still trying to figure out their lives. Yet we're out here giving, this kind of energy to a stadium and to Sony and to all these other corporations instead of just improving our education system and improving our roads and improving the things that would naturally draw businesses here.
Yeah, absolutely. And Hollywood makes money hand over fist.
Sure.
Mostly because, they short a lot of people. There's a writer strike going on right now. So
Yes.
Solidarity to the people out on the picket lines for that. Hopefully they will get their concessions and we can all go back to enjoying our favorite shows. It's the same thing as we were talking about. People are sick of these subsidies. They are wondering, why do we have to have this? Some people have said, well, this is great. If we had this during the pandemic, then we would have weathered that storm when the casinos closed. No, we wouldn't have. What are the odds that the governor at the time, Steve Sisolak, would have said, well, Hollywood production, that's
Has
an
to shut
essential
that-
business.
Yeah, no,
we
that-
can't shut
shut
that
that
down. Of
down
course
too.
they would have shut that down. So now the pandemic is a rare example. Hollywood is I would argue one of, other than aerospace and defense, Hollywood is one of America's most successful businesses. They dominate the world in entertainment. America dominates the world. And so it's a very moneyed industry. I think this part of the reason that this is even being considered is the fact that California's business climate is not good, and businesses are leaving, and people like Mark Wahlberg are coming and saying, maybe we should set up, in addition to hamburger restaurants, maybe we should set up Hollywood out here. It's just a short flight away, and we could do a lot of business here without state income tax, without some of the other onerous taxes, and hey, maybe they'll even give us some money to do this. And I think it's attractive to lawmakers because, well, they're going to get to pose with movie stars, and they're going to get to tour the movies, and who knows, maybe they'll get to be in a movie. Dare to dream. There's a few lawmakers up here that I think probably could do it.
Yeah, they've got the theatrics on point. Yeah,
theatrics.
yeah.
Yes, exactly. But again, you have to ask yourself, is what we are going to get worth it? Because we're not asking whether or not, this should happen. Even though this is a brand new kind of industry, we're asking how much. Because again, we have decided to play in this economic development game, and we're bidding now against other states like Georgia, like South Carolina, other countries like Vancouver, Canada, that are also trying to get into this and do production in their locations. So it's a matter of how much. When I saw the initial figure on that, though, I have to admit, I have been coming up to this session for now. This is my 11th session. Annette has 10. I have 11. And I've been coming up here since 2001. And I think that's one of the most eye-popping numbers I've ever seen for any bill.
Yeah.
That rivals, it's not as much as, but it rivals, it would be a goodly chunk of the state budget, maybe a little less than half of the general fund budget of Nevada. So that's a lot of money, and that's something that I think some of these details are going to have to be worked out. That and the A's bill coming, as I said at the beginning, on top of the hundreds of bills that will get to be processed,
On top of the threat of a veto of the budget.
on top of that, makes the end game for this session extremely, extremely uncertain. I really don't know what is going to happen. To be honest with you, and I think it could end up in a very disastrous way. I almost guarantee a special session is going to happen, which those of us who do come up here don't want. A lot of people think, oh, it's great to come up here. It is for the first maybe week, and then when it's not 12 feet of snow, but after that it's a slog, and that slog is probably going to be extended. The governor's staff says he has a nice comfy house to live in up here, so he can wait them all out. And I think there's some people here in this building who think that they can wait him out. So that's not going to be good either way you do it.
Yeah, I think that's right. Any surprises do you think in the end game? Any things that kind of shock us that pop up?
Other than that price tag on that film text. I think the most, they say that, every session is different, but all sessions end ugly. And I think that's going to be true this time.
Oh, I think it's going to end super ugly.
It is going to be an ugly end as they do it. Just the mechanics of finishing a session, getting everything done, finished on time before that midnight deadline. They're gonna long for the lazy days of February when they were, leaving on Thursday and not working the weekends. They're gonna want that time back. Unfortunately, that's not how time works, so they will not get it back. And so I think we're going to be working and pushing up to the midnight hour and beyond for this session.
The last question I have for you, and this is something I've talked a lot about with our team and with our partners and with the volunteers on the ground, is this notion that if you get out of session without doing harm, right? Rolling back voting rights, rolling back criminal justice reform, those fentanyl bills, killing those, right? If you get out of session and don't roll back the good stuff we did during the Sisolak administration and some of that stuff, that would be a win for me this session. How do you feel about that? Because I don't know that very many of our priorities actually get over there and get signed by the governor at this point. So how do you feel about that?
Yeah, I think that is probably represents the thinking of a lot of people around here. There is no way. I can tell you this right now. Very few things are guaranteed, but I can guarantee you this: there's no way the Democrats in this building are going to roll back a single election reform that they have achieved. They're not going to roll back universal mail voting. They are not going to roll back the days and times of early voting. They're not going to change the deadlines for when the ballots are due. They're not going to do anything.
I don't even see them doing school choice for him, the voucher scheme. I don't even see them doing that, especially now.
No, there is. I spoke with someone and I am almost positive that there are not the votes. Even if the leadership wanted to do it, there are not the votes in those caucuses for them to get that done. I just don't think that's going to happen. So the Democrats then at that point become defensive. They will try to override the governor's veto because that now becomes an issue against him in 2026, but also more acutely and more approximately in time, that becomes an issue in 2024 when they're trying to secure the one vote that they need, one vote in the state Senate to have a 2/3 supermajority in the state Senate. At that point, it's game over because it doesn't matter then that there's divided government because they can, with 2/3, do anything, call themselves into special session, override a veto, pass a tax increase, do all those kind of things. And so, and I think there's a very good chance that they get that vote, at least one in the state Senate. And so it may be just a wait and see game, game of defense until 2024. And then the 2025 session, they can go back on offense. So yeah, I think that's probably what a lot of people are thinking. Like we're going to pass the budget, defend our gains, don't let anything that we don't want get through. There's no reason to do it. Wait and see what happens in 2025. Now, if in the 2024 election they don't do it, well, the 25 session could be a lot different.
Yep.
But I think right now it's. Right now, I don't know that they know logistically how they're going to close the session.
Yeah, I don't know either. All right, Steve, thank you. We'll have you back before the end.
Yeah, absolutely.
All
Only
right.
2 more shows, right?
Oh, we'll do more than that because, every day we start doing them at the end.
Oh, is that right?
Special session, special edition.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point.
All right, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us. Sorry that Assemblyman Wynn couldn't join us today. We'll try and have him on again next week. He was in committee and the Revenue Committee. We do have a deadline tomorrow. We will be on Facebook and Twitter all day tomorrow, giving you updates on the different bills that we're covering, that we're watching. So please make sure you're on our Facebook and our Twitter and following along with us. We will send more emails as things get moving again next week ahead of the next deadline. So make sure you're following Maria's emails, Brian's emails, and make sure that you join us next week out in front. I'll be back in the building next week out in front live here at 5 o'clock. And we will have more legislators and other folks to talk to you then. So thanks everyone for joining us, and I hope you have a great evening. Stay safe, and we will see you next week, Thursday at 5 p.m. Have a great evening, everyone.